Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending where you are in the world. Welcome to our CEO panel webinar this afternoon. I'm here based in Sydney. We have people from New Zealand, all the way across through Tasmania and Sydney today, and Melbourne with Pat. It's great to be with you for building the case for culture. It's awesome to have a very esteemed panel group here this morning. We kicked off today in our virtual conference, our 22nd in Australia and our 16th in New Zealand, with some great presentations from Sandoz and Spark. I was inspired by both sessions. Everyone has a handprint in the culture. What a fantastic quote from Sandoz this morning. And their motivation to be inspired, curious and unbossed. What a great lead-in for our sessions today, tomorrow and Thursday. And it's a testament to Sandoz that they're actually continuing their journey. They're not stopping. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about that this afternoon from our panelist. Spark closed out our morning session, self-awareness and purpose. It rings true. And I love their message at the end. Share your unfinished self, be comfortable with who you are, and find those opportunities to collaborate. So thank you to both Sandoz and Spark for this morning. A little bit of housekeeping for us this afternoon. All the lines have been muted. Please use the chat function for Q&A. We have Jess, our producer in the background, who will support us on the panel with your Q&A. If we run out of time, and I suspect we will, given our panelists, they all have a lot to share today, we will publish some responses to the questions we get. A brief introduction to our panelists. We have Rebecca Cardos, Managing Director and CEO of Aurora Energy in Tasmania. Rebecca has been with us before and actually shared her recent shift just last week on our webinar with all of us. Rebecca is passionate about realising the value for all of her stakeholders, customers, consumers, suppliers, the shareholders. Her courage and commitment to create, collaborate and facilitate change will definitely shine through today. Thank you, Rebecca. We also have Pat Mcafee, the Managing Director of Yarra Valley Water in Victoria. Pat and his team serve over 2 million customers. They have 5 billion assets and an annual turnover of over $1 billion. Yarra Valley Water have built and sustained their culture over the long term, and the journey started in 2001. Pat has played a pivotal role in building this culture, and his focus and commitment is a testament to his views on the role of culture in the organisation. Thanks, Pat, for taking time to join us.
Thanks.
Jo Denver, Chief Executive of Lifewise New Zealand. Jo is an experienced Chief Executive in the leading not-for-profit sector, and she recently joined Lifewise from Lifeline New Zealand. Lifewise are doing great things for the community, and their goal is to create a better world. Jo's perspective on culture and sustaining performance under very demanding conditions will no doubt provide some wonderful insights for us today. Vaughan Payne, CEO of Waikato Regional Council in New Zealand. He's had that position since 2013. Vaughan is passionate about collaboration and leadership and its impact on culture. The three most important words for him are working well with others. Thanks, Vaughan. And finally, but not last, we have Simon Towns, Managing Director and President of Constellation Brands in New Zealand. Constellation Brands supply wine, beer and spirits, including a very good red called The Prisoner, which I can highly recommend. In addition to now developing and implementing the growth strategy of Constellation Brands across Asia Pacific, which is Simon's remit, Simon brings a unique perspective on culture, which I'm sure we can draw on. He was a professional field hockey player and represented New Zealand at the Olympics in 2004. Thanks for joining us, Simon. So some very brief introductions, but let's get into the topic. Building the case for culture. What a fascinating topic, and I'm sure we could talk for several hours, but we have 45 minutes. And as a leader, I often get asked, how do I get my CEO on board with culture? What's the trick? So how do we do it? All of our CEOs today have decided at one point that culture is important, and they've actually invested in it and championing it. Culture, we're not going to spend time defining it, but very briefly, it's the way we do things around here. It's those shared values, norms, expectations that guide us. I often talk about the invisible hand that helps us understand how I need to behave in order to thrive and survive in my organisation. So leading off, our first question that we've searched when we asked people to what would CEOs they'd like to answer, there must be something in the beginning that convinced all of you to focus and invest on culture, whether it was brought to you or you realised it through your own experience. Rebecca, I'll lead with you. Can you please tell us about what led you to culture?
Thanks, DB. As I shared at the HS conference 2 years ago, culture kind of crept up on me. I did a bit of consulting for a while, and I got to a point where I could walk into an organisation and kind of know whether or not they could deliver their strategy. And I couldn't work out what it was, but there was something, you could always pick the organisations with that special sauce. And, you know, some organisations would have great strategy, but an inability to deliver it. And then there would be other organisations who had a great strategy and also this special sauce which enabled them to deliver it. And, you know, I then discovered over time that that special sauce is the now not so special ingredient called culture. And that's kind of how I realised is if you really want to achieve what you set out to achieve, you've got to really think about culture.
Thanks, Rebecca. Joe, I think you would like to add to that.
Yeah, my introduction into the importance of culture was a bit different. It was a bit more of a slap in the face. I started a new position in a not-for-profit organisation that had a really toxic culture within the senior leadership team that obviously seeped throughout the organisation. I think sometimes what you find in not-for-profits is people are very passionate about the cause and about clients, but often not so passionate and not so empathetic to each other. So I don't think it's that unusual in not-for-profits. But in this particular organisation, as well as fighting and drama, there was paranoia, gossip, rumours, and everyone seemed to be out for themselves. So there was a lack of communication or hostile communication, some aggressive behaviours, so others didn't feel safe to speak up. There was narcissistic behaviour, specifically from one member, although others modelled or copied behaviour as well. So this team member demanded that everyone agree with them, and appeared that they didn't think the rules sort of pertained to them, and they expected everyone else to be perfect, even if they weren't. So it created distinct groups within the leadership and within the organisation, low morale, high turnover, and lots of PGs. So obviously, this hostile culture was creating a really unpleasant work environment for everyone, and it was having a direct impact on organisational performance. And strangely enough, that convinced me to focus on culture.
Fantastic. And there's some very different stories there, the secret sauce and then the visible artifacts you could see of the culture. Simon, what led you to culture?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was a reflection of how much I was enjoying the job and how much some of the people in my team were. We were achieving our goals purely measured against the strategy. We were winning versus the competition, if that was also a way of judging. But I wasn't doing fun along the way, and a lot of my team weren't either. We also had spots of the organisation where we had some high churn. So that's kind of the context. At the same time, I got back into hockey and I started coaching again. And that's where it sort of twigged, right? What had made teams outperform over time that I've been involved with was often the culture. And that was what the defining difference was. And so that really gave the opportunity to get back into the organisation, spend time with my team, and see if we could make that same difference and have a whole lot more fun along the way and achieve even more if we spent some time investing in culture.
Yeah, excellent. And Pat, we'll go to you. What led you? And you've been on the journey, I would say, probably the longest of our panel. So we'll turn back the clock.
Yeah, well, it wasn't my idea, but we actually recruited a new general manager of HR, as it was called back in the day, in the early 2000s, late 90s, and Anne Farquhar was her name, and she convinced the organisation that culture was something that we needed to pay attention to. And I think the original MD of the organisation, it was a very brave decision, because it really, he was, and we were leading the business with an 80s and 90s sort of style that was effective for that time, but not something that was going to be sustainable going forward. And deep down, we knew what we would get when we got our first lots of results, but they were still confronting. I think testament to the organisation was the persistence then to stay the course and to continue to measure it, to commit to it, and then to make it a fundamental element of our corporate strategy. We managed to keep it there up in lights for 20 years now.
Yeah, fantastic. Really good. And you can see here some very different motivations to actually lead into culture, from the secret sauce to the very visible that artifacts Joe spoke about. Simon talked about his experience from the building of the team, and Pat about leading for the future, and leading rather than the 80s, right now in the time we are today. I suppose that, and as leaders of your respective organisation, it leads me to the next organisation. And Pat, we ended with you, so we'll start with you. There's
Sure.
always a question around the role of the CEO, and let's extrapolate that to the role of the senior leaders, your leadership team, play in shaping the organisational culture. What can you tell us about your role and the role of your senior leadership team?
Sure, and I'd add the board to that as well. I think CEOs, leaders and boards, they play a massive role, obviously, in shaping the culture by what they do and what they don't do, in fact. But, they bring it to life initially through, defining the desired culture. And then, as I was sort of talking about before, how we integrate it into strategy. So they provide this authorising environment, if you like, and make a stand or place an emphasis on culture. That's the first thing that they can and should do. And then they obviously authorise all of the enabling of the culture. So any investments in initiatives or programs that are going to shift the culture, and those sorts of things, and the appropriate level of resourcing and attention, and the measurement of those things as well. That obviously what gets measured gets done, as they say. But I think the most important thing is that they model it, and the cues that the leaders provide is going to shape the culture all the time. And so it's probably not so much about what the CEO or leader will say, it's what they do. And in fact, I think the best way to sort of to kill it is to behave in a way inconsistent with what you express or what you stand for as your culture. People watch their leaders like a hawk, and they pick up inconsistencies really quickly. So the whole authenticity and integrity of the thing has to be present.
Beautiful. I can see Joe, Simon and Rebecca are all nodding. And we'll continue the reverse theme. So Simon, we'll go to you. What is the role that you play in your leadership team?
Yeah, so where Pat landed at the end there, I 100% agree, the most important, and that we have to behave like we believe in it, and behave because we believe in it. And part of that is also being vulnerable about your own areas for development, and realizing that you don't have all the answers. I have a very orientated profile, and it's when I got back involved in coaching and coaching kids again that it reminded me there's a whole lot of other things that I really value and love, and my job to work on those myself, leader of my own style as I help lead in an organization. I'd say that the other two areas I think that are important, one is investing like we believe. So we can behave the right way and talk the right way, but if we don't really put our money where our mouth is, then there's a problem there as well. And I think it's really relevant for people today as we think about the economic crunches that are upon us. Are you a company who's going to continue to invest, or are you going to back off on your investment in culture? I know we've stated that we're going to overinvest in our marketing of our brands during this period of time because we believe we can capture market share. during that period of time. We also believe the same about our people. Actually, we're doing the right things during these tougher times. We'll probably get even more benefit out of them than in a normal time. So I think the investment part, and lastly, I think making room for the conversation to be had, and that the answers are going to come from all across the organisation. So creating the room for that conversation is the role of all the senior leaders on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that over investing. Joe, your perspective, the role of the CEO and the leadership team in creating the organisational culture.
Well, I agree with both Pat and Simon, and it's actually hard to add very much. I guess chief executives and leadership team have a critical role, and whether they do it intentionally or not, they're shaping the culture of the organisation. I think whether you're communicating the big picture vision or ensuring organisation values are present, or just in the day-to-day details, chief executives need to be really deliberate about their behaviours to ensure that what they're doing supports their company culture. And I think also it requires, and I think Pat said 20 years, it does require a strong and ongoing commitment to living the culture like every day. And I think when employees see the chief executive behaving in a way that demonstrates the organisational values, it resonates and encourages them to do the same. On the other hand, if they see discrepancies in your behaviour, then it tells them that their behaviour doesn't matter because the chief executive is not walking the talk. So the motto that I've always kind of held on to and tried to live by is be the change you want to see.
Love it. Yeah, love it. Rebecca, how would you add to the role of the CEO in culture?
Yeah, look, I love that, Joe, as well. And I agree with Pat's point. You know, leaders have this phenomenal ability to make a good culture or a bad culture. And that's really powerful. And you can choose to harness that, or if you choose not to, it's really dangerous and can really, really impact your business to an irreparable level if you're not careful. And given that phenomenal responsibility, you know, if you think that no one's watching or listening, then you're delusional. And on the other side, you're missing out on this great opportunity to unleash the phenomenal capability that's inherent in all our organisations. And that was, for me, was really evident in the early phases of COVID earlier this year. We were really clear and upfront that our people were number one. Their health and safety, their well-being was paramount. And they could see in the choices that we made, the decisions that we made, that was just so evident. And in return, they were amazingly resilient and adaptable and didn't miss a beat in terms of our customers. And that's the power of culture, and that's the power we have as leaders to unleash that in our organisations.
Fantastic. And Vaughan, great to we lost you.
Yes.
Great to see you back. The role of you as the Chief Executive of Waikato Regional Council and your leadership team, what's the role the leaders play in culture?
No, kia ora, David, and my apologies, my Surface Pro seemed to have COVID or went into lockdown for a little while, but there's a few points to make. I think the first, in terms of a CE's role, is linking purpose and culture. So while we have governors that determine purpose, you know, and give us our why, the CE needs to grab hold of that why and translate that into the business and work out what needs to happen to achieve that purpose. And that includes building necessary culture to support the purpose. I think the other point, which I think was mentioned by Rebecca and Joe, was around leading by example and holding to account. And that applies to everyone, including the CE and including governors. So I do work with my governors to ensure that we create the right environment to support culture. So asking for KPIs for myself that create and support the culture that we need to support our purpose. And then having discussions with our governors, because governors, and in my case, they're largely lay people who have come into a governance role, community people, and talking to them about what is the culture that council wants and what that means when they interact with staff, and the importance of role modelling leadership and our values. And it's certainly not easy, given we're talking about my employers, but it's a necessary conversation that needs to occur.
Yeah, thanks, Vaughan. And there's some pivotal insights from all of you there. And if I was to string a theme through there was role modelling, living what you believe. There was being vulnerable. And I know Simon mentioned the word vulnerability and sharing who you are. And then finally, I think several of you touched on the concept that you need to invest. And the investment does start with the most senior leaders in the organisations. Great insights. So Vaughan, we'll lead off with the next question with you. We'll give you some more airtime. How is culture shaping your organisation, the Waikato Regional Council? And what's the impact it's having on performance for Waikato?
Thanks, David. I think the constructive culture shift that we're seeing in our organisation is something that we're most proud of, and something that's talked about a lot, including by our governors. And in my view, performance is naturally flowing out of that shift towards a constructive culture. And I can talk and share a lot about performance metrics, whether it's our net promoter score and things like that. But if I can talk about something that's quite current to us all, and that relates to how do you support an organisation through these unprecedented times. So like others, we had 3 objectives during lockdown. One was around staff welfare, another around maintaining essential services, and a third is looking to the future and helping our country with an economic recovery post-COVID. And I certainly saw through lockdown our organisation really pulling together, our executive team being well supported by an incident management team comprising staff across the organisation. Virtually, we met twice daily during lockdown, and I certainly had the confidence to pass on to all staff how to manage through this challenging time. We had a staff survey during lockdown that was an 82% response rate, 94% rated communication highly, and 97% they had confidence in our organisation's response to lockdown. And just lastly, around that third objective around economic recovery, I asked the team, because our government invited proposals from organisations, but we only had 2 weeks to come up with proposals around economic stimulus and creating jobs for those who had lost jobs. Just the proposals were due just after Easter. I touched base with the team just before Easter on how they were going. At that time, they were talking about $30 million worth of proposals in 3 projects. And then they worked right through Easter. I caught up with them at the back end of Easter, and they had grown to $120 million and 1,000 jobs. And I gave this team very little guidance except let's try and do projects that relate to accelerating our work, environmental restoration work with farmers. And so I was just really impressed with how from our work on culture over the last few years, I just don't think we would have coped as well through these challenging times. So yeah, been pretty proud of the performance displayed through these unprecedented times.
Yeah, there's no doubt that culture, the organisation with strong culture coming to the fore now at times like now. Joe, the impact on Lifewise and your previous life with Lifeline, how does culture impact those organisations?
Well, it improves the performance. I think one of the things that I've found, and I think that corporate culture is probably the most important factor in driving innovation. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Maybe it's because people feel that they want to go the extra mile, and probably they feel a bit braver to come up with, you know, radical ideas. But our Lifewise prides ourselves on being innovative and trying to come up with new ways of supporting people. And so the culture is really, really important in driving that. I also, through COVID, I think our organisation pulled together really well. And I agree, I don't think that would have been possible without having, you know, a somewhat strong culture. I think also what drives Lifewise again, because we're a not-for-profit, is doing the right thing by our clients. So that was also helpful. But we had to work really differently around communication and engagement. So we had to be more flexible and I guess trying to create a culture of inclusion is a new target when you've got a lot of remote work staff who are working remotely. And I think one of the challenges is keeping the team building and relationship building kind of going when you're a long time out of the office and away from face to face. I actually started this role 2 weeks into the first lockdown. So it was quite an interesting way to start an organisation, and quite challenging to get to understand the culture, to understand people, because culture is often about watching how people interact and seeing who goes into whose office after you've talked to them and that kind of thing. So it did take me a little while longer than normal, I think, to get to grips with the culture.
Yeah.
But a couple of other things I've noticed is that working remotely seems to be really good for well-being for lots of groups. Introverts seem to have a much stronger voice when they're talking on Zoom. I think having your own environment gives you your own voice. And it's good for people with mental health and addiction issues. The whole well-being and able to work flexibly works really well. So the challenge will be to get the balance right between remote working and relationships.
Yeah, how do we sustain the positives that we've captured out of the COVID-19? Your point on innovation is a perfect segue, and Pat knows it's coming his way. So Pat, culture, how's it shaped and the impact on Yarra Valley Water?
Oh, so many different ways. It impacts every aspect of the business, and I think, you know, someone was talking before about freeing up innovation as well. And, you know, to Joe's point, it's how you respond and how you back up people to have a crack at doing something more extraordinary than just, you know, drifting along. And it's what you do when it doesn't work as well, that it really does shape the culture. And I was reflecting the other day, talking to a recent hire at our exec, and she was saying that, and because I'm too embedded now to properly describe it in some respects, but her observation was that when she comes to the executive team meetings, everyone is aligned, everyone's well intended. We might debate and pull apart issues, but always with the right motivation consistent with the core purpose of the company. And she's not felt that before. She's worked in other environments where she wasn't sure what that other person's motivation was. Everyone was second guessing each other when they're sitting around the table. So by a long-term investment in culture, we've gotten rid of that stuff that just gets in the way. So I think that's been a really important benefit for us. But it's playing out in other ways now, where the organisation, I guess, sees itself as a part of a much bigger picture. You know, signing up to the Sustainable Development Goals and doing things like integrated profit and loss statements to try and figure out what's our real value and where our real impacts as a business, as opposed to just a narrow accounting view of the world, and where can we actually really make a more meaningful difference. And, you know, it's led to things like, you know, obviously working on climate change and things like building waste to energy plants, but also really importantly, the support for the vulnerable in the community, and working in partnership with other essential service providers now to see how can we all lift all the boats. You know, COVID's shone a light on vulnerability, hasn't it? So how do we all work together to be far more effective as essential service providers? You know, so people can thrive. You know, no matter what their financial circumstances are. So that's how it's playing out for us.
Fantastic. And Simon, the impact for you at Constellation Brands?
So preface this by saying we're at the very beginning of the journey. So I'm at the other end of the spectrum from Pat in the sense of the change that we're trying to make with the organisation. So we're sort of facing the reality of the starting point and getting great clarity over the areas that we want to improve in. I mean, thankfully, I think the starting point is reasonably sound. What I have found is just by putting some effort behind it and making sure that it's an area of focus, already people are feeling more included. And that's a great positive in terms of getting different voices to the table to get better solutions. I think the second thing that we're finding is it's changing how we hire, how we develop, and how we reward. And some of those things are a little challenging as a subsidiary of an American company, where it's an individualistic culture and we have performance rewards that are very based on the individual. Luckily, through some of the work that we've been doing, we're being able to convince them that, hey, it's worth having a crack and we're small enough not to negatively impact their culture, and it's okay for us to do something that's a little bit more collective in nature so that we can get more out of our teams. So a early stage work in progress, people are engaging in it, we're already seeing some benefits, but the prize at the end is far greater. Fantastic.
And Rebecca, the impact on Aurora and the team for you?
It has been, I think, probably the key point that I would make is we are living in disruptive times. And I think, you know, today is no more, it's so evident of that. And what investing in culture has done for us is created this inner capability and resilience to enable us to adapt without having to tell everyone what to do and being able to embrace the times that we're in. And that's for me where the real gain is from a performance perspective. And we're doing some work around purpose at the moment, and we've been asking our people, what's our superpower? And they're coming back and saying it's our culture. And, you know, they're right. That's our superpower. That's an organisation's superpower. And you can face into any externality that is unplanned for and be able to adapt and rise above it and do what you need to do, whether that's for your customers, for your community, for your shareholders, and make something from that. The creativity that our culture is unleashing in our organisation at the moment is phenomenal. Joe's so right about innovation. They're testing and learning and trying new things, and they're having a lot of fun doing it. So, you know, this whole new working from home experience, they're really playing with it. And through that, our culture is actually improving. And I think that's the phenomenal aspect to all of this.
It's an exciting and fun place to be. Outstanding. The question we often get asked is, I need to convince my CEO, or if you need to convince another CEO of the value of culture, what would you say? I'll throw it to the panel. You need to convince a fellow peer. What would you say? Leave it to the panel. Who wants to respond? Vaughan, all yours.
Yeah, I think, excuse the cliche, but I think it is very true that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You know, that if you create the right environment, anything's possible, and that's really having those shared values, those shared norms, so people feel part of a family. I meet with all new staff just to check in with how they're going, and without fail, every time I meet with staff, they're just blown away by how welcoming the organisation is, the strength of the culture, and I just see also staff who perhaps they've gone away on parental leave, they've gone to another organisation, they've come back, and similarly the feedback on the shift and the positive impacts of culture. So, and as I say, performance speaks for itself. It naturally flows from culture.
Fantastic.
Can I add to that? Yeah, I think I totally agree with everything Vaughan said. The other thing I'd ask is someone or a fellow CEO who was thinking about it would be to ask the question, what keeps you up at night? Because invariably it'll be, they'll be thinking about the safety of their people, maybe the financial performance, how's the service, reputation, stakeholders, and all of those sorts of things. But ultimately, where the culture is going to pay off, maybe help CEOs sleep a little bit better, is that individuals are going to be faced with uncertainty and choices. And they'll have to make decisions without all the guidance that's available to them. What you're hoping for is, if they've got a good connection to the purpose, the culture, the values, and the beliefs will play out and inform that choice. And we don't have to look far in the corporate world, where there's been so many issues lately of corporate failures and bad behaviour, and everyone just keeps pointing back to culture. So if you put the investment into culture, you can at least rest a little bit easier that all of the people that you have in your organisation, when they're faced with those dilemmas, faced with those choices, hopefully if the culture is really strong and embedded and it's the right culture, they'll make the right choices most of the time.
Fantastic. Simon?
Yeah, and following that theme of people in your organisation, for a lot of organisations, it's your biggest asset. It's probably your most risky and transient asset. You can't actually own them, right? We can own our other assets. Yet all of our other assets or our brands, we're very willing to invest in. And so why would we not take that same approach to invest and then measure culture to make sure that we have the right people to deliver the right performance? And the evidence, and a lot of the evidence that human synergistics bring to the table is also helpful, right? The proof points that lead through to performance, that lead to shareholder value, if that's what we're trying to deliver, to customer value. It's a very clear line that you can wrap a business case around, as you would any other asset in your business.
Yeah, I like that. You can't own this asset, but you can certainly help this asset perform to its best.
Yeah.
Rebecca, Joe, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think good culture makes people want to come to work in the morning. It makes it hard, or at least harder, for people to leave in the evening. It keeps people engaged and productive and innovative, and people really want to come to work. I think your future as an organisation may depend on the culture, or does depend on the culture, so don't be afraid to invest in it.
Yeah, nice. Rebecca, any closing comments for you on that question?
No,
What would you say?
Sorry,
What
DB?
would you say to a CEO to convince them?
I'd ask them the question, if you had no people, would you deliver your strategy? Would you achieve your strategy? And the answer is obviously no.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you invest? And as like Simon said earlier, why wouldn't you invest even more on them, given how critical they are, as you do in all the other myriad of things? And if that doesn't work, then I'd just say the words Royal Commission.
I like it indeed. There's lots of chat coming through that culture is the only competitive advantages. Competitors can steal almost everything except your culture. And then you do have the Royal Commission. As we draw to our close, our time is rapidly closing out. If you were going to provide any insights or tips from your perspective as leaders of your organisations, what would be your 1 or 2 tips that you would provide? Over to the panel. Who would like to lead us off?
I'm happy to go first, DB.
Hey, Rebecca.
Be brave.
Be brave.
Culture's not easy. you have to be really, really brave. I know that from my own experience. And but it's worth it. It is so worth it, both on a personal level, an organisational level, and even more importantly, a community and a community level. So be brave and just do it.
Thank you.
For me,
Dawn, I
Dave,
think you were going to go.
for me, it's the importance of taking a team approach to culture. That it's not the CE, it's not the governors, but it's the entire team, and the more that we share leadership throughout the organisation and accept that everyone's got leadership potential, then your culture naturally will occur, the right culture that you want.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I'd say be persistent, stay the course, understand why you're pursuing it, which is all about better outcomes for your organisation's customers and for your people. And ultimately, it's about people being the best that they can be. Why wouldn't you want that?
Beautiful. Simon or Joe?
Yeah, sure. So I think when I have to tell myself the whole time, let's be patient. You know, it is going to take a long time, but it's going to be worth it. Have fun along the way. You learn as much about yourself as you do about your organisation, and that has massive benefits at a personal level. And don't forget that. And just remember how rewarding it is to coach people. There's nothing more rewarding than seeing others achieve.
Yep. And Joe, your wisdom.
Just model, just behave the way that you need everyone else to behave. So be the change you want to see. And the other thing is, it appears, and we all know, that culture really does matter. It does matter. So that's it.
Beautiful. And we've had a last minute question pop up. As CEOs, describe your culture in 4 words or less.
I'm happy to lead off. It's captured in our values: customer obsessed, it's a personal best. Together we thrive, curiosity.
Beautiful.
I'd say collaboration and positive difference.
Beautiful.
I would say the sharing of values and aligning those with our goals.
Yep. Beautiful. Joe or Simon?
Inclusive and innovative.
Inclusive and innovative.
I've got empathetic, honest, inclusive, and innovative. Yep.
Fantastic. Look, from me to the panel, we could talk for another hour very easily. And there's lots of questions that are streaming through. Please send your questions through. I'm sure Pat, Rebecca, Simon, Joe, and Vaughan will make some time to answer some questions. I know, Pat and Rebecca, there's a couple of specific questions about dealing with engineers in there, which might be heading your way. I feel sorry for those engineers, but we're all people. But be curious, be brave, be persistent, enjoy, have fun, and live your values.